The morning of January 9th, 1942, aboard the battleship Yamato, anchored in Hiroshima Bay, Admiral Yamamoto sat in his quarters reading a letter from Ogata Taketora, a journalist and politician who had congratulated him on the Pearl Harbor attack. The fleet's celebration outside his cabin continued, raucous and confident. Japan had struck the Americans sleeping in their harbor. The Pacific was theirs. Yamamoto put down his pen and stared at the words he had just written. His response was not what Ogata or anyone else expected. A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply, for the one smitten. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. While his staff celebrated, Yamamoto remained sunk in apparent depression. He understood what his colleagues did not. The attack on Pearl Harbor, tactically brilliant as it was, had been a strategic disaster. The carriers had been at sea, the oil storage facilities remained intact, the repair infrastructure stood undamaged. Most critically, the Americans were now united in a way they had never been before. Yamamoto knew America. He had studied at Harvard from 1919 to 1921. He had served as naval attaché in Washington from 1926 to 1928. He had walked the streets of American cities, visited American factories, observed American industry. He had watched automobiles roll off assembly lines in Detroit. He had seen oil derricks dotting the landscape of Texas. He had witnessed the casual abundance of a nation that produced more steel, more aluminum, more petroleum than Japan could ever hope to match. In 1940, when Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe had asked him about the outcome of a possible war with the United States, Yamamoto's answer had been blunt and prophetic. If we are ordered to do it, then I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. 6 months. He had given Japan 6 months before American industrial might would begin to overwhelm them. Every officer in the combined fleet knew this prediction. Some dismissed it as excessive caution. Others believed Yamamoto was being diplomatic, softening the reality for political consumption. A few understood he was being optimistic. The numbers told an uncomfortable truth. In 1941, the United States produced 47 million tons of steel. Japan produced 7 million tons. American petroleum output reached 1,400 million barrels annually. Japan produced almost none, relying entirely on imports from the Dutch East Indies and other conquered territories. American industrial capacity was not merely larger than Japan's. It was 10 times larger, perhaps more. Japanese naval doctrine had long recognized this disparity. The plan had always been to achieve a 70% strength ratio against the American Navy, then force a single decisive battle, a Kantai-Kessen, similar to the victory at Tsushima in 1905. One massive engagement would shatter American will and force a negotiated peace before American industry could fully mobilize. Pearl Harbor was supposed to create the conditions for that decisive battle. By crippling the American Pacific Fleet at the outset, Japan would buy time to consolidate its conquests, establish an impregnable defensive perimeter, and prepare for the climactic confrontation. But Yamamoto understood what his peers did not. The decisive battle doctrine assumed parity or near parity in production capacity. It assumed that losses inflicted could not be easily replaced. It assumed an enemy that would negotiate after a costly defeat. None of these assumptions held true for America. In February 1942, Yamamoto moved his flag from Yamato to the newly commissioned battleship Musashi. His staff prepared for the next phase of operations. Intelligence reports crossed his desk daily, detailing American movements, American construction programs, American industrial output. One report in particular caught his attention. The Americans had begun emergency shipbuilding programs. New shipyards were under construction. Existing yards were expanding. Most alarming, the Americans were building Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels, at a rate of 3 ships every 2 days. The Kaiser shipyards in California had reduced construction time for a 10,000-ton freighter from 150 days to 70 days. Some yards promised to cut that to 40 days. Yamamoto did the mathematics. If American yards maintained that pace, they would replace Japan's entire merchant fleet several times over before the year ended. And that was just cargo ships. What about warships? What about carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers? The answer arrived in March. American intelligence had been partially compromised, but enough information leaked through neutral channels and diplomatic sources to provide a clear picture. The Americans had authorized construction of 10 Essex-class fleet carriers. Each would displace 27,000 tons, carry 90 aircraft, and be protected by modern anti-aircraft batteries. The first, USS Essex, was already under construction in Virginia. Keel, laid in April 1941. Projected completion, December 1942. 10 fleet carriers. Japan had entered the war with 10 fleet carriers total, accumulated over 2 decades of construction. The Americans planned to build 10 in less than 2 years, while simultaneously building light carriers, escort carriers, battleships, cruisers, and hundreds of destroyers. Yamamoto called his chief of staff, Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki, to his cabin. "Have you seen the American construction reports?" he asked. Ugaki had. "The numbers seem exaggerated. American propaganda, perhaps. They want us to believe their industrial capacity is infinite." "I have seen their industry," Yamamoto said quietly. "The numbers are not exaggerated. They are probably conservative." "Then what do we do? We win quickly, or we lose slowly." The Battle of Midway in June 1942 presented the opportunity for the quick victory Yamamoto sought. His plan was complex, perhaps too complex. 8 separate task forces, a diversionary attack in the Aleutians, the occupation of Midway Island, and most importantly, the destruction of the American carrier fleet. If the American carriers could be lured into a trap and destroyed, Japan would have another 6 months, perhaps a year, to consolidate its position. The battle was a catastrophe. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk. The Americans lost 1, Yorktown. The carrier force that had struck Pearl Harbor, that had terrorized the Pacific for 6 months, ceased to exist in a single day. More than 300 experienced pilots and air crews died. Aircraft carriers could be built. Trained pilots could not be easily replaced. Yamamoto's prediction had come true almost exactly. 6 months and 1 week after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese offensive capability was broken. After Midway, the character of the war changed. Japan shifted to the defensive. The Solomon Islands campaign became a grinding war of attrition that Japan could not afford. American submarines began targeting Japanese merchant shipping, slowly strangling the supply lines to the southern resource area. Oil tankers disappeared. Cargo ships carrying rubber, tin, and bauxite never reached home ports. The raw materials Japan had gone to war to secure were being denied by an undersea blockade. In November 1942, Yamamoto received intelligence estimates on American naval construction. The report was detailed, compiled from multiple sources, cross-checked against diplomatic cables and neutral observers. The conclusions were devastating. The United States would complete 6 Essex-class carriers by the end of 1943. 9 Independence-class light carriers would enter service in the same period. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, all under construction in unprecedented numbers. By mid-1944, the American Pacific Fleet would outnumber the entire combined fleet by a factor of 2 to 1. By 1945, the ratio would be 3 to 1 or greater. Yamamoto shared the report with his senior commanders in January 1943. The meeting was held aboard Yamato at Truk Atoll. Present were Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, and several staff officers. The mood was grim. "These numbers cannot be accurate," Kurita said. "No navy in history has expanded at this rate." "No navy in history had America's industrial base," Yamamoto replied. "I warned of this before the war. Now we see it unfolding." "Then what is our strategy?" Ozawa asked. "Survival," Yamamoto said. "We defend our perimeter. We inflict maximum casualties on their advances. We make every island cost them dearly. Perhaps, if we make the price high enough, they will negotiate." "And if they do not?" Yamamoto had no answer. In March 1943, he conceived Operation Singo, a major air offensive against Allied positions in the Solomon Islands. He moved carrier air groups to Rabaul, concentrating 350 aircraft for strikes against Guadalcanal, Port Moresby, and other targets. The goal was to slow the American advance, to demonstrate Japanese resolve, to remind the Americans that Japan could still strike back. The operation achieved little. Japanese pilots, many of them poorly trained replacements for the veterans lost at Midway and in the Solomons, claimed heavy successes. Post-operation assessments revealed the truth. Few Allied ships had been sunk. Defending fighters had taken a heavy toll on the attacking aircraft. More irreplaceable pilots were dead. The American advance continued unabated. On April 18, 1943, Yamamoto departed Rabaul on an inspection tour of forward bases. American code breakers had intercepted his itinerary. Admiral Chester Nimitz authorized Operation Vengeance. 16 P-38 Lightning fighters took off from Guadalcanal with a single mission: shoot down Yamamoto's plane. The interception occurred exactly as planned. Lieutenant Rex Barber's guns found their target. Yamamoto's Mitsubishi G4M bomber crashed into the jungle of Bougainville. A Japanese search party found his body the next day. 2 bullet wounds, one to the shoulder, one to the jaw. The wound to the jaw had killed him instantly. Yamamoto never lived to see the full manifestation of American naval power. He never witnessed the Fifth Fleet's 535 warships assembling for the Mariana Islands campaign. He never saw American carrier task forces operating with impunity across the Pacific, their aircraft blanketing Japanese positions with overwhelming superiority. He never observed the final accounting of his predictions, but his successors did. Admiral Minechi Koga assumed command of the combined fleet in May 1943. Where Yamamoto had been cautious and strategic, Koga was aggressive and willing to risk major engagements. He believed the combined fleet could still achieve a decisive victory if the conditions were right. His intelligence officers provided him with regular updates on American naval strength. The reports made for grim reading. By November 1943, American carrier strength in the Pacific had recovered to pre-Midway levels. The Essex-class carriers were service. USS Essex herself had joined the fleet in May, USS Yorktown in April, USS Lexington in February, USS Bunker Hill in May. The construction pace was actually accelerating, not slowing. Each month brought new warships, new aircraft, new sailors trained in American schools that processed thousands of recruits through standardized programs. Japan's own construction programs struggled. The carrier Taiho, laid down in July 1942, would not be completed until March 1944. The carrier Unryu, begun in August 1942, would not launch until September 1943. 1 carrier per year, perhaps 2, if resources permitted. The Americans were completing 1 carrier per month, sometimes more. The disparity extended beyond numbers to quality. American radar technology had surpassed Japanese systems. American damage control procedures had proven superior. American aircraft, the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, outperformed the Zero in speed, altitude performance, and durability. American pilots, trained in safer rear echelon programs, arrived at the front with hundreds of hours of flight time. Japanese pilots rushed through abbreviated courses to replace casualties, arrived with barely enough training to survive their first combat mission. In November 1943, the Americans launched Operation Galvanic, the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. 2 Marine divisions landed on Tarawa and Makin atolls. The Japanese garrisons fought to near annihilation, inflicting heavy casualties on the attackers, but the islands fell. American engineers immediately began constructing airfields, turning conquered atolls into forward bases for the next advance. Admiral Koga watched the American advance with growing alarm. He had moved Combined Fleet headquarters from Truk to Palau, anticipating the American drive across the Central Pacific. Intelligence reported massive American naval forces assembling in Hawaii, 5 fleet carriers, multiple light carriers, escort carriers, battleships that had been raised from the mud of Pearl Harbor, refitted with modern weapons and radar, now returning to exact vengeance. The Americans were not just building more ships, they were building better ships, faster ships, ships equipped with technologies Japan could not match. Their naval doctrine had evolved rapidly, incorporating lessons from each engagement. Their logistics system, despised by military professionals for its excessive abundance, proved decisive. American ships never wanted for fuel, for ammunition, for spare parts. Japanese ships increasingly operated at reduced capacity, rationing supplies, deferring maintenance, making do with what little reached them through the submarine-infested sea lanes. In February 1944, the Americans struck Truk during Operation Hailstone. Combined Fleet had evacuated its major units just in time, but the strike revealed the vulnerability of Japan's fortress bases. 2 days of air attacks sank 12 merchant ships, destroyed over 200 aircraft, and left the harbor burning. The Americans demonstrated they could project power anywhere, could strike any target, could operate with near impunity because they had the ships, the planes, and the pilots to overwhelm any defense. That same month, intelligence reports reached Combined Fleet headquarters with updated assessments of American strength. The Fifth Fleet, formally designated in late April 1944, would operate as the primary striking force in the Central Pacific. Its composition: 15 fleet carriers, 956 carrier aircraft, 7 fast battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, 13 light cruisers, and 69 destroyers. Task Force 58, the fast carrier task force, alone, possessed more striking power than the entire Combined Fleet. Admiral Koga reviewed the numbers with his staff. The meeting was quiet. No one disputed the figures. No one offered optimistic assessments. The mathematics were undeniable. "How many major combatants do we have available for the decisive battle?" Koga asked. His operations officer consulted the latest readiness reports. 9 carriers operational, 7 battleships, 18 heavy cruisers, 17 light cruisers, approximately 60 destroyers capable of extended operations. "And how many aircraft?" 473 carrier-qualified pilots, perhaps 500 aircraft operational, including reserves. Koga did the calculation. The Americans had twice as many carriers, with more under construction. They had more aircraft, better trained pilots. Their supporting battleships and cruisers outnumbered Japan's remaining capital ships. Their destroyers, built in assembly line fashion by the dozens, formed screens that Japanese submarines could barely penetrate. "What did Admiral Yamamoto say?" Koga asked. "About running wild for 6 months." "He said after that he had no expectation of success," the operations officer replied. "It has been 2 years," Koga said. "What expectations should we have now?" No one answered. The silence was answer enough. On March 31st, 1944, Admiral Koga's plane disappeared during a flight from Palau to Davao. Caught in a typhoon, both aircraft in his convoy vanished over the Philippine Sea. His body was never recovered. Command of the Combined Fleet passed to Admiral Soamu Toyoda, who inherited a navy that existed more on paper than in reality. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Toyoda was a battleship admiral, a product of the old school that believed in gun power and decisive surface engagements. But he was also a realist. The intelligence briefings he received in May 1944 left no room for illusion. The Americans were coming, and they were bringing a fleet that dwarfed anything Japan could muster. The intelligence estimates were precise. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded Task Force 58 of the Fifth Fleet. His force consisted of 15 carriers organized into 4 task groups. Each task group operated independently but could mass for coordinated strikes. The carriers embarked 900 aircraft. Supporting them were 7 fast battleships, including Iowa, New Jersey, Alabama, and South Dakota, each displacing 45,000 tons and armed with 9 16-inch guns. These were not the old battleships raised from Pearl Harbor. These were purpose-built for modern naval warfare, equipped with radar-directed fire control, massed anti-aircraft batteries, and speeds exceeding 30 knots. They could keep pace with carriers, provide anti-aircraft defense, and engage surface targets with devastating accuracy. Behind these fast carriers came the amphibious forces, 500 transport ships carrying 127,000 troops, the invasion fleet for the Marianas, supported by its own escort carriers, destroyers, and fire support ships. The entire American naval effort in the Central Pacific comprised over 1,000 vessels of all types. Admiral Toyoda convened the senior staff of the combined fleet at his headquarters in Tokyo. The date was May 3rd, 1944. Present were Vice Admiral Ozawa, now commanding the newly designated 1st Mobile Fleet, Vice Admiral Kurita, commanding the 2nd Fleet, and various staff officers. The purpose was to finalize Operation Eigo, the plan for the decisive battle that Japanese doctrine had always demanded. The Americans will strike the Marianas within weeks, Toyoda began. Intelligence indicates their target is Saipan. If Saipan falls, their B-29 bombers will range the home islands. We cannot permit this. The mobile fleet will sortie to meet them. Ozawa studied the operational map. What forces can we concentrate? 9 carriers, Toyoda said. 5 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers, 430 aircraft immediately available, with another 40 in reserve. Supporting units include 5 battleships, 11 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 28 destroyers. Against their 15 carriers and 7 battleships, Ozawa said quietly. We have advantages they do not, Toyoda insisted. Our aircraft have longer range. We can strike from beyond their radar detection range. Our pilots know they fight for the homeland, and we have land-based air support from the Marianas. The Americans will face attacks from 2 directions simultaneously. It was wishful thinking, and everyone in the room knew it. But wishful thinking was all that remained. The mathematics of industrial production had rendered traditional naval strategy obsolete. America had achieved what no nation in history had accomplished. They had built a navy so large, so technologically advanced, so well-supplied that they could absorb losses that would cripple any other power and continue operations without pause. Captain Omai Toshikazu, a staff officer who had served under Yamamoto, spoke carefully. Admiral Yamamoto predicted this. He said that in a protracted war against an opponent with America's industrial advantage, military victory was impossible. He said the only way we could win was to dictate terms in the White House. He meant it was impossible. Then what do you propose? Toyoda asked sharply. Surrender. I propose. We acknowledge reality. The Americans have built a fleet we cannot match. They replace losses faster than we can inflict them. They train pilots faster than we can shoot them down. Every day the war continues, the disparity grows worse. Reality, Toyoda said, is that we are ordered to fight, so we will fight. The Battle of the Philippine Sea began on June 19th, 1944. The Japanese called it Operation Eigo. The Americans would later call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The name was not hyperbole. Admiral Ozawa launched his strikes from maximum range, hoping to catch the American carriers unprepared. His aircraft flew over 300 miles to reach Task Force 58. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Fighter direction officers vectored F-6F Hellcats to intercept. The ensuing air battle was less a fight than a slaughter. Japanese pilots, many with fewer than 100 hours of flight time, faced American pilots with 300, 400, 500 hours of training. The Japanese flew older aircraft, the Zero, the Valdive bomber, the Jill torpedo bomber. The Americans flew Hellcats that could outclimb, outrun, and outdive anything Japan possessed. American ships bristled with radar-directed anti-aircraft guns that filled the sky with proximity-fused shells. Of the 373 aircraft Ozawa launched in the first wave, only 130 returned. The second wave of 129 aircraft lost 97. The third and fourth waves suffered similar losses. By the end of the day, the mobile fleet's carrier air groups had been annihilated. 315 aircraft destroyed. Hundreds of pilots dead. The Americans lost 29 aircraft in combat. But the carrier aircraft were not the only losses. American submarines had penetrated the mobile fleet's destroyer screen. USS Albacore fired a spread of torpedoes at the carrier Taiho, Japan's newest and most modern carrier. One torpedo hit, a single torpedo. Taiho's damage control parties mishandled the resulting aviation fuel leak. 6 hours later, gasoline fumes ignited. Taiho exploded and sank, taking 1,600 men with her. USS Kavala found the carrier Shikaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and countless operations. 4 torpedoes struck home. Shikaku burned for hours before exploding and sinking. 1,300 dead, 2 fleet carriers lost, hundreds of aircraft destroyed. The mobile fleet's offensive capability eliminated in a single day's fighting, and the Americans had barely suffered. Their carriers operated undamaged. Their aircraft losses were minimal. Their pilots rotated back to rear areas for rest and retraining, then returned to combat with even more experience. Admiral Ozawa retreated. He had no choice. His carriers had no aircraft. His remaining ships were low on fuel. The decisive battle Japanese doctrine had demanded for 40 years had occurred. Japan had lost catastrophically. The reports reached Tokyo on June 20th. Admiral Toyoda read them in his office. His aide, Commander Masatake Chihaya, waited for orders. "How many pilots did we lose?" Toyoda asked. "Approximately 250 carrier-qualified aviators, sir, plus another 100 land-based pilots from the Marianas." "And the Americans?" "Fewer than 30 pilots lost." Toyoda set down the report. For the first time since assuming command, he spoke with complete candor. "We cannot win this war. We cannot replace these losses. The Americans can. They have 10 times our industrial capacity. They produce pilots as if from a factory. They build ships faster than we can sink them. Every battle makes them stronger and us weaker." "Then what do we do, sir?" "We follow our orders. We fight." Saipan fell on July 9th, 1944. The garrison of 31,000 men fought nearly to annihilation. American casualties were heavy, over 16,000, but the island was secured. Construction crews began work immediately on airfields suitable for B-29 operations. By November, American bombers would be striking Tokyo from bases on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The fall of Saipan triggered a political crisis in Tokyo. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, who had led Japan into war, resigned on July 18th. His replacement, General Kuniaki Koiso, inherited a position that was untenable. The war was lost. Everyone with access to accurate intelligence knew it, but surrender was unthinkable. The military would not permit it. The emperor's position forbade open discussion of defeat. In late July, Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai gave a private interview to a trusted journalist. His words, recorded but not published until after the war, revealed the depth of despair among Japan's naval leadership. "The Americans have built a navy that is beyond our comprehension," Yonai said. "Their Fifth Fleet alone possesses more combat power than our entire combined fleet at the start of the war. And that is just one fleet. They have others, They have reserves. They have construction yards launching new ships every week. Can we negotiate peace? The journalist asked. With what leverage? We have lost the Marianas. We are losing the Philippines. Soon we will lose Okinawa. The Americans demand unconditional surrender. They will accept nothing less. They can afford to demand it because they know we cannot stop them. What did Admiral Yamamoto say about this? Yonai paused. Yamamoto understood before the war began. He told Prince Konoe that if ordered to fight, he could run wild for 6 months, but after that he had no confidence. It has been 2.5 years. We have no confidence. We have no hope. We have only the obligation to fight until we are ordered to stop. In October 1944, the Americans invaded the Philippines. Admiral Toyoda authorized Operation Shogo, a desperate gamble to catch the American invasion fleet vulnerable during the landings at Leyte Gulf. The plan committed virtually every remaining major combatant of the combined fleet. 4 separate forces would converge on Leyte Gulf simultaneously, overwhelming the American escorts and destroying the invasion transports. The operation was a disaster. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought from October 23rd to 26th, became the largest naval engagement in history. The combined fleet threw everything it had into the battle. The Americans met them with overwhelming force. The carrier strike force, sent north as a decoy, lost all 4 of its carriers. The center force, built around the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, was decimated by air attacks. Musashi, the largest battleship ever built, absorbed more than 20 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits before finally sinking. The southern force was ambushed and destroyed in a night surface action. Only the center force, under Admiral Kurita, penetrated close enough to threaten the American landing beaches, but even that force withdrew after encountering unexpectedly fierce resistance from American escort carriers. The combined fleet lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. 28 major warships sunk or damaged beyond repair. The Americans lost 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. 6 ships. The ratio of losses told the story. For every American ship sunk, Japan lost nearly 5. And the Americans could replace their losses within months. Japan could not replace any. After Leyte Gulf, the combined fleet ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The remaining ships fled to the inland sea, where they remained anchored, immobilized by lack of fuel. American submarines had strangled the tanker routes from the southern resource area. Oil imports, which had averaged 4 million barrels per month in 1942, had fallen to 200,000 barrels per month by late 1944. The Navy barely had enough fuel to sortie for training exercises, let alone major operations. Captain Atsushi Oi, a staff officer assigned to Combined Fleet Headquarters, kept a private diary during the final months of the war. His entries, discovered after Japan's surrender, provide insight into the thinking of mid-level officers who understood the situation but could not influence it. November 15th, 1944, received the latest intelligence assessment on American naval construction. They have commissioned 9 Essex-class carriers this year alone. 9. We have completed 1 Unryu. They are building 24 more Essex-class ships. We have 2 more under construction, both unlikely to be completed before war's end. The numbers are incomprehensible. How does one fight an enemy who builds ships as if they were automobiles? December 1st, 1944, Admiral Toyoda held a staff conference today. We discussed options for defending Okinawa. The Americans will come in the spring. We have no carriers, no aircraft, and insufficient fuel for sustained operations. Someone suggested using the battleships Yamato and Musashi for a final sortie. Musashi is at the bottom of the Sibuyan Sea. We cannot even keep track of which ships still exist. January 8th, 1945. The American fleet bombarded the home islands today. Their carriers approached the coast with impunity. Our air defenses are negligible. Our naval forces cannot sortie. We sit in port and watch the enemy operate freely in our own waters. What would Admiral Yamamoto say if he could see this? He predicted it all. He told us we could not win a protracted war with America. We did not listen. In February 1945, the American Fifth Fleet appeared off Iwo Jima. The invasion fleet comprised 500 ships. The pre-invasion bombardment lasted 3 days. The island, garrisoned by 21,000 men, held out for 36 days before falling. The Americans paid heavily, suffering over 26,000 casualties, but the island became another forward airbase for the final assault on Japan. Admiral Toyoda watched the reports from Iwo Jima and knew what was coming. Okinawa would be next, and Okinawa was close enough to the home islands that its loss would be catastrophic. He called his staff together in March to discuss Operation Tengo, the last sortie of the combined fleet. The plan was simple, because nothing complex was possible. The battleship Yamato, escorted by 1 cruiser and 8 destroyers, would sortie for Okinawa. They would beach themselves and use their guns to support the island's defense. It was a suicide mission. Yamato had fuel for a one-way trip. No air cover would be provided because Japan no longer had carriers or aircraft to spare. "This is the end of the combined fleet," Toyoda said to his staff, "but we will demonstrate that we can still fight, that we still have the spirit to resist." Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, designated to command the operation, protested. "Sending Yamato without air cover is suicide. The Americans will sink her long before she reaches Okinawa. The crew will die for nothing." "They will die demonstrating Japanese resolve," Toyoda replied. "That is not nothing." On April 6, 1945, Yamato and her escorts sortied from the inland sea. American submarines detected them immediately. Reconnaissance aircraft shadowed the force. By the morning of April 7th, American carrier aircraft were inbound. 386 aircraft from Task Force 58 attacked Yamato and her escorts. The battleship's anti-aircraft guns fired continuously. Her gunners shot down a handful of attackers, but the wave was too large, too coordinated, too overwhelming. Torpedoes struck Yamato's port side, then her starboard side. Bombs penetrated her deck armor. Fires raged through the ship. More torpedoes hit. The ship began to list. Counter-flooding proved ineffective. The list increased. At 14:23, Yamato capsized and exploded. Her magazines detonated, sending a mushroom cloud visible for 100 miles. Of her crew of 2,767, only 280 survived. The cruiser and 4 of the destroyers also sank. The surviving destroyers retreated. Operation Tengo had lasted less than 2 days. Yamato's loss marked the symbolic end of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the largest battleship ever built, designed to counter America's numerical superiority with qualitative dominance, had been destroyed by aircraft from carriers that the United States produced almost casually. American industry had built 15 Essex-class carriers by April 1945. Work continued on 9 more. The Americans had also built 9 Independence-class light carriers and over 100 escort carriers, 124 aircraft carriers. Japan had built 15 fleet carriers in its entire history. Captain Oi learned of Yamato's loss that evening. His diary entry was brief. April 7th, 1945. Yamato is gone. The Americans sent nearly 400 aircraft. We could not have defended against 40. This is what Admiral Yamamoto understood. This is what he tried to warn us about. The Americans did not just wake a sleeping giant, they awakened a nation with industrial capacity we could never hope to match. Yamato was a symbol of our belief that quality could overcome quantity. The Americans proved that sufficient quantity renders quality irrelevant. They built so many ships, trained so many pilots, produced so many aircraft that nothing we could do mattered. We were trying to fight the ocean with swords. In Tokyo, the Supreme Council for the direction of the war met in emergency session after Yamato's loss. The council consisted of Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, War Minister Korichika Anami, Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai, Army Chief of Staff Yoshijiro Umezu, and Navy Chief of Staff Soimu Toyoda. The meeting lasted 7 hours. The discussion focused on a single question. Should Japan seek peace before the home islands were invaded? Yonai presented the Naval Ministry's assessment. The Imperial Navy no longer exists as a fighting force. We have no carriers. We have no battleships. We have perhaps 36 destroyers and cruisers capable of operation, but no fuel to operate them. The Americans control the seas absolutely. Their fleet can approach our coasts with impunity. They can bombard our cities at will. We cannot stop them. The army can still fight, Anami countered. We have millions of men under arms. We can make an invasion so costly that the Americans will negotiate. With what have they shown any willingness to negotiate? Togo asked. They demand unconditional surrender. They have the strength to enforce that demand. Every day we delay, more cities burn, more civilians die. Surrender is unacceptable, Anami said. The Emperor's position must be preserved. Our national honor must be maintained. Our national honor, Yonai said quietly, was lost when we started a war. We could not win. Admiral Yamamoto knew this. He told anyone who would listen. The only way Japan could win was to march into Washington and dictate terms in the White House. He meant it was impossible. We ignored him. Now we pay the price. The debate continued without resolution. The military factions refused to accept surrender. The naval officers understood the war was lost, but lacked the political power to force peace. The Foreign Ministry sought diplomatic options, but found none. The Americans would not negotiate. The Soviets, bound by neutrality treaty, waited for the moment to strike. On August 6, 1945, a single B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 70,000 people died instantly. On August 9th, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. That same day, the Soviet Union declared war and invaded Manchuria with overwhelming force. The combined fleet that Yamamoto had built, that had struck Pearl Harbor with such devastating effect, no longer existed to defend against any threat. The Supreme Council met again on the night of August 9th into the early morning of August 10th. The debate deadlocked 3-3. Prime Minister Suzuki took an unprecedented step. He asked Emperor Hirohito to break the tie. The Emperor spoke slowly and clearly. I cannot bear to see my people suffer any longer. The time has come to bear the unbearable. Japan would surrender. In the days after the surrender announcement, Navy Minister Yonai gave another interview. His words were published in a Japanese newspaper, shocking in their candor. From the moment Germany could not defeat the Soviet Union, our war was unwinnable, he said. We continued fighting for 2 more years, not because we believed we could win, but because we could not agree on acceptable terms for losing. That disagreement cost hundreds of thousands of lives. When did you know the war was lost? The interviewer asked. I knew before it began. Admiral Yamamoto knew. Many of us knew. We understood American industrial capacity. We had seen their factories. We knew what they could produce. But knowing and accepting are different things. We knew we could not win a protracted war. We went to war anyway. We watched the Americans build a fleet that made our combined fleet look like a coastal defense force. We watched their 5th fleet grow to 535. Warships. Our entire navy at peak strength never exceeded 400 ships, and most of those were destroyers and escorts. The Americans built that many destroyers as an afterthought while constructing dozens of carriers and battleships. What would Admiral Yamamoto say if he had lived to see this? Yonai paused. He would say, I told you so. But he would say it with sadness, not triumph. Yamamoto loved Japan. He opposed the war because he knew it would destroy us. He was right. The Americans did not defeat us because their sailors were braver or their admirals more skilled. They defeated us because they could build 10 ships for everyone we built, train 10 pilots for everyone we trained, and lose 10 battles for everyone that mattered because they had the strength to absorb losses and continue. We could not. The final accounting was devastating. The United States Navy ended the war with 99 aircraft carriers of all types, 23 battleships, 72 cruisers, and over 350 destroyers. The Imperial Japanese Navy ended the war with 1 operational carrier, no battleships, and fewer than 40 destroyers, most of them damaged or immobilized by lack of fuel. During the war, the United States built 16 major warships for every 1 Japan built. American shipyards produced 5,600 merchant ships totaling 56 million tons. Japanese yards produced 320 ships totaling 3 million tons. American factories delivered 300,000 aircraft. Japanese factories delivered 70,000. What did Japanese High Command say when America's 5th Fleet grew larger than Japan's entire navy? They said very little publicly, but in private meetings, in diaries, in post-war interviews, they acknowledged what Yamamoto had known from the beginning. Japan had bet everything on a short war and decisive victories. When the war became long and victories became impossible, industrial capacity determined the outcome. America's factories had built a fleet so large that Japan's naval power, impressive in 1941, became irrelevant by 1944. Admiral Toyoda, in his post-war testimony, summarized it bluntly. "We knew the Americans were building ships at an unprecedented rate. We received intelligence reports regularly. But knowing the numbers and seeing the reality were different experiences. When their carrier task forces appeared with 15, 20 carriers at once, when their battleships numbered in the dozens, when their supply ships stretched from horizon to horizon, we understood that we were not fighting a navy. We were fighting an industrial system that could produce warships faster than we could sink them." Yamamoto tried to warn us. We did not listen. In the end, what Japanese leaders said mattered less than what they learned. They learned that courage and skill could not overcome industrial disparity of 10 to 1. They learned that quality weapons could not defeat quantity weapons backed by superior technology. They learned that a nation producing 47 million tons of steel annually would always defeat a nation producing 7 million tons, given sufficient time. They learned what Yamamoto had known. The war was lost before it began. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.